A cold night in Los Angeles, Keanu Reeves was walking towards the metro station after a long day when he noticed a man crouched in a corner, dressed in tattered clothes. People passed him by without a second glance. Keanu slowed his steps. There was something familiar about the man's face. The deep lines, the unkempt hair, the exhaustion in his eyes. A feeling deep inside urged him to take a closer look. Keanu knelt beside him. "Are you okay, man?" he asked gently. The man lifted his head, his pale face looking up at Keanu, but he said nothing. A few seconds of silence passed, and suddenly, memories rushed through Keanu's mind. Childhood moments, riding bikes, running through the streets, lying on their backs, and watching the stars at night. His eyes widened. "Michael," he whispered in disbelief. The man's eyes filled with tears. He tried to look away, but Keanu knew there was no hiding anymore. Michael, once Keanu's best friend. They had spent every moment of their childhood together, but life had taken them down different paths. Michael had joined the army, while Keanu pursued acting. And now, after all these years, his closest friend was sitting on a street corner, broken and lost. Keanu's heart ached. "What happened to you, man?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael took a deep breath, swallowing hard. "I got lost, Keanu. Life pushed me here." A small cafe. The cold winter air fogged up the windows. Soft music played in the background. Keanu sat across from his old friend, his hands resting on the table, his eyes locked onto Michael's. Michael clutched his coffee cup tightly, as if the warmth could erase years of suffering. Michael took a shaky breath, his voice unsteady. "Do you remember who I used to be, Keanu? That strong, determined kid. That kid, he died in the war." Keanu furrowed his brows. "No, man, you're still here. That kid didn't die. He just got lost. We can find him again." Michael gave a small, sad smile, but his eyes were still haunted. If you knew what I've been through, you'd probably think I shouldn't even be alive." Keanu remained silent, listening. Something inside him was breaking. Michael ran a hand down his face before continuing. "When I came back from the army, I wasn't me anymore. My body was here, but my mind was still stuck on the battlefield. My nights were filled with nightmares. I'd wake up screaming, but there was no one there." Tears started to silently fall down his face. "I lost my first job because I kept having panic attacks. Even the sound of a phone ringing made me drop to the ground, thinking I was under attack. People were afraid of me, Keanu. I didn't even recognize myself." Keanu swallowed hard. He stared down at his coffee cup, trying to contain the anger and sorrow rising inside him. Michael continued. "My wife, she tried to understand me, but I had become a stranger. One day, she found me sitting in the kitchen, gripping my head, completely disconnected from reality. That was the day she left. She never came back." Michael let out a bitter chuckle, but his eyes told a different story. "Then my family, they abandoned me too. My mother looked into my eyes and said, 'You're not my son anymore.' That day, I packed whatever little I had left and walked out. There was nowhere to go." Keanu clenched his fists. "How could they do that? You're their son. You're a hero, Michael." Michael shook his head with a hollow laugh. "People love heroes, Keanu, but only when they're on the battlefield. Once we become useless, they forget us and throw us away." His gaze drifted into the distance, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Keanu, have you ever felt like the whole world was avoiding you? Like people deliberately turned their faces away as you walked past? Have you ever sat on a street corner, starving, while people acted as if you didn't exist? To them, I was just a discarded rag, used, useless, forgotten." Silence filled the air. Keanu closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. His eyes were glossy, but he didn't cry. He had been one of the biggest stars in Hollywood for decades. Millions of people watched his movies. Strangers hugged him in the streets. And yet, sitting across from him was a man who had once been his best friend, someone the world had refused to see. Keanu slowly reached out and placed a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. "I won't let this happen, man. We're going to change this. Michael looked at Keanu's hand, then into his eyes. The warmth and determination he saw there shook him to his core. No one had looked at him like that in years. After a long pause, his lips trembled as he asked, Do you think I can really get better?" Keanu nodded without hesitation. "We all fall, Michael, but sometimes we need someone to help us back up. I'm here for you." As tears silently dripped onto his coffee cup, Michael realized that what Keanu was offering wasn't just kindness. It was a chance at a new beginning. Keanu drove in silence, glancing at Michael, who stared out of the window, lost in thought. It had been a long time since he had been in a warm home. "Where are you taking me?" Michael finally asked. Keanu smiled slightly. "Home." Michael frowned. "You don't need to put me in a hotel." Keanu shook his head. "Those days are over. You have a home now." Keanu's house was big, but felt warm and welcoming. As Michael stepped inside, he hesitated. He hadn't stood in a doorway like this in years. Keanu disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a plate of hot food. Michael stared at it for a long time, his hands trembling. "Come on, man. You must be starving." Michael took his first bite. His eyes welled up, but he tried not to cry. That night, Keanu showed him to a clean room. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, running his fingers over the soft blanket. Keanu spoke from the doorway, "Get some rest." Michael nodded, but his mind was still a storm of emotions. For the first time in years, he felt safe. Keanu helped Michael find a job, but it wasn't easy. Employers looked at his past, saw his clean record, but still hesitated. He might have post-military psychological issues, they murmured. Michael clenched his fists. "They're judging me by my past." Keanu narrowed his eyes. "Then we'll make them see your future." After several failed interviews, Michael finally landed a job as a waiter at a local diner. It wasn't much, but it was a start. On his first day, Keanu sat among the customers, quietly watching his friend take orders. Michael was nervous, but there was a spark of excitement in his eyes. As Keanu observed, he whispered, "That's it, man. That's the way." 1 year later, Michael had his own home, a stable job, and most importantly, a purpose. But he didn't just rebuild his own life. He started helping other homeless veterans. With Keanu's support, he formed a small group and launched projects to assist those in need. One day, Keanu attended an event where Michael was the keynote speaker. Standing on stage, Michael held the microphone, scanning the audience. "I was once just another face on the streets. No one saw me, no one cared, but one man did. And he didn't just help me, he believed in me." Michael turned his gaze to Keanu. "He gave me hope." The audience erupted in applause. Keanu, standing quietly in the corner, smiled, because he hadn't just helped his friend, he had given him his life back. And so, a man once forgotten by society had now become a beacon of hope for others. As the applause faded, Michael stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward Keanu. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around him in a tight embrace. "I owe you everything," he whispered. Keanu patted his back and shook his head. "No, Michael, you did this. I just reminded you of who you always were."